Have you ever heard of a man who had neither crown nor throne, yet kings bowed before him? A man who commanded no army, yet his orders were carried out thousands of miles away in the most heavily fortified palaces in the world. In the 11th century, deep in the heart of Persia's impenetrable mountains, lived a phantom, a recluse. He was called Sheikh al-Jabal, the old man of the mountain. His fortress Alamut was carved into the very rock, soaring above the clouds. They said no army in the world could take it, but the old man's true power was not in stone and walls. It lay in his will. Picture this. A mighty sultan, surrounded by 1,000 bodyguards, wakes up in the morning, and on his pillow beside his head he finds a dagger. A fresh, still warm dagger, and a note, "You are in our power." Imagine the envoy of a European king who arrived in Alamut with audacious demands. In response to his arrogance, the old man of the mountain silently pointed to 2 guards atop a tower, and they, without a single word, with smiles on their faces, hurled themselves into the abyss, simply to prove their absolute devotion to their master. Who were these people? Angels of death, demons. Legends say the old man created a copy of paradise on earth. A secret garden where young warriors were plied with hashish, shown bliss, and then promised to return there, but only after death in the sheikh's name. They went to their deaths as if to a festival, dreaming of eternal pleasure. Was he a prophet, a devil, a genius illusionist, or something far, far more terrifying? He was Hassan-i Sabbah, the man who transformed assassination into an art and fear into his personal empire. And today, we will unravel his 1,000-year-old mystery. We will walk a dagger's edge, separating shocking truth from chilling fiction. Because the story of this man is not just a tale of the past, it's an instruction. An instruction on how a single mind and unyielding will can bring the entire world to its knees, and this lesson is as relevant today as ever. To understand how a monster is born, one must first look into the world that birthed it. Let's transport ourselves to the 11th century, Persia, a land of ancient culture and great poets groaned under the heel of conquerors. The mighty Seljuk Empire, a Turkic dynasty adhering to Sunni Islam, ruled with an iron fist from the borders of China to the Mediterranean Sea. For them, faith was law and order was strength. But beneath this apparent stability, an ocean of hatred seethed. Millions of Shiite Persians considered the Seljuks barbarians and usurpers. They were followers of Ismailism, a secret mystical current within Islam that believed true knowledge was accessible only to the chosen few. For them, the Sunni rulers were heretics, and their own faith was the only path to light. They awaited their imam, their messiah, who would come and cleanse the world of impurity. The atmosphere was permeated with the expectation of a miracle, and the scent of impending massacre. It was at this time in the city of Qom, into the family of a fervent Shiite, that a boy named Hassan was born. From childhood he was different from the others. While his peers played in the dusty streets, he locked himself in the library. His mind, sharp as Damascene steel, greedily absorbed everything. Algebra and geometry, astronomy, which bordered on astrology, the most complex philosophical treatises, and of course all the intricacies of Islamic theology. He wasn't just learning, he was searching for hidden meanings, secret keys to the world's structure and power over it. And here, on the pages of ancient chronicles, we find a legend so beautiful and tragic it reads more like a parable. It is said that fate brought young Hassan together with 2 boys at the famous madrasa in Nishapur, boys who were destined to become titans of their era. One was named Nizam al-Mulk, the future great vizier, the sultan's right-hand man, the most powerful man in the empire. The second was Omar Khayyam, the future brilliant poet, mathematician, and philosopher, whose rubaiyat would endure for centuries. The 3 young geniuses, 3 friends, allegedly swore a blood oath to each other, that whoever among them achieved success first would extend a helping hand to the others. Fate smiled upon Nizam al-Mulk. He soared to the heights of power. Remembering his oath, he summoned his friends to court. Omar Khayyam, a true sage, asked for only one thing, a quiet abode and a modest pension, so he could unhindered study the movement of the stars and compose his immortal verses. His request was granted, but Hassan, his soul, craved something else. He craved not knowledge, but power, absolute, limitless power. Accepting his friend's offer, he plunged into the world of palace intrigue. He was intelligent, eloquent, and incredibly charming. With his speeches, he captivated the Sultan himself, and began to weave a web of conspiracy to displace his friend and take his place. But he made a fatal mistake. He underestimated the old wise vizier. Nizam al-Mulk unraveled his schemes and presented proof of his betrayal to the Sultan. Disgrace, exile. Hassan-i Sabbah lost everything. Humiliated but unbroken, he was cast out beyond the empire's borders. As he left the capital, his eyes burned not with the cold ashes of defeat, but with an inextinguishable flame of hatred. He vowed he would return. And when he returned, he would build his own empire, an empire that would be ruled not by sultans and viziers, but by his mind alone. He would make those who humiliated him tremble at the mere mention of his name. Most historians today consider this story a mere fabrication, a beautiful Eastern tale, created after the fact to explain the enmity between two of the era's greatest minds. But isn't that the essence of it? This legend, even if invented, lays bare the very soul of Hassan-i Sabbah, his genius, his immense ambition, and his icy contempt for human bonds. This was the turning point. The exiled schemer died. In his place, a strategist, a prophet, and the future master of history's most terrifying order was born. His path henceforth lay into the darkness, into the heart of the Ismaili underground. To Egypt, exiled and betrayed, Hassan didn't seek refuge in the desert. He headed to the very heart of the power that opposed his enemies. His path led to Cairo, to Egypt. At that time, Cairo was not just the capital of the Fatimid Caliphate. It was the Ismaili Vatican. It was a city of secrets, the hub of a global espionage network, where within the walls of the great Al-Azhar University and in secret lodges, preachers and agents were trained, who were then dispatched throughout the Islamic world. Hassan arrived in Cairo not as a fugitive, but as a rising star. Rumors of his incredible mind and fiery faith had already reached Egypt. He was received with honors. He gained access to esoteric knowledge, to ancient manuscripts, to the most secret doctrines of Ismailism. He studied not only theology, he studied psychology, the art of persuasion, methods of recruitment, and the creation of underground cells. He understood. The strength of the Seljuks lay in their armies, in their visible might. Therefore his strength must lie in invisibility. He saw how the Fatimid Dawah, a system of propaganda, was structured. He saw the 9 steps of initiation through which an adept had to pass. At each step, a greater part of the truth was revealed to him, gradually dismantling his old beliefs and replacing them with new ones. First, the convert was merely gently nudged towards doubt. Then, the inadequacy of official religion was demonstrated to him. Afterward, secret interpretations of the Quran were unveiled. And so, step by step, his mind was completely reformatted until, at the highest stage, he realized that all external rituals and laws were merely conventions created to manage the ignorant masses. But for the chosen, the initiated, there was only one truth, the Imam's will. Hassan absorbed this system like a sponge, but he also saw its weaknesses. The Fatimid court in Cairo was mired in luxury and intrigue. The caliph was weak. Real power lay in the hands of viziers and warlords. They were too far removed from the common people, from those persecuted and hungry for justice, who ought to be the fuel for the coming war. Hassan understood. One could not expect mercy from a rotten elite. One had to create his own independent force. A force that would obey not the caliph of Cairo, but only him. He began to form the core of his future followers, choosing the smartest, the most fanatical, the most ruthless. His growing influence and radical ideas began to frighten even his patrons in Cairo. He placed his bet on one of the caliph's sons, Nizar, as the future true imam, and entered into conflict with the powerful vizier. Very soon, Hassan transformed from an honored guest to a dangerous conspirator. He was thrown into prison. It seemed like the end. But then something happened that transformed his story into a legend. It is said that on the very day Hassan was imprisoned, the prison's minaret collapsed. His enemies, seeing in this a divine sign, were struck with terror. They didn't dare execute a man who, it seemed to them, was favored by the heavens themselves. Instead, they put him on a European ship bound for the Maghreb, just to be rid of him. But fate intervened again. Off the coast of Africa, the ship was caught in a terrible storm. The crew panicked, everyone prepared for death, and only one man on deck remained absolutely calm. This was Hassan. He turned to his companions and said, "Do not fear. My Lord promised me that I would not perish, for I have a mission. The storm will now subside, and as if by magic, the wind died down and the waves calmed. The ship, blown off course, landed not in Africa but in Syria. From there Hassan began his long journey back to Persia. But this was no longer the man who had fled Isfahan. He returned not merely an exile. He returned a bearer of secret knowledge, a master of underground struggle, a man who, as his followers believed, could command the elements and foresee the future. He would no longer ask for power. He would take it, and for that he needed his own fortress, his own impregnable bastion, from which his hand could reach the throat of any sultan. His gaze turned to the mountains, to the place that would go down in history as the eagle's nest, to Alamut. Have you ever wondered what's stronger, an army of 100,000 swords or a single brilliantly conceived idea? Hassan-i Sabbah knew the answer. Upon returning to Persia, he did not raise an army. He began to weave a web. His weapons were not soldiers, but da'as, secret preachers, missionaries, whose words were sweeter than honey and sharper than a dagger. For years they glided like shadows through cities and villages, finding resonance in the hearts of the oppressed. And their main target became one specific point on the map, a place that was to become the heart of his future empire. Imagine a rock, not just a rock, but a giant stone fang piercing the sky, rising over 2 kilometers high. On its summit like a crown stands Alamut Fortress, the eagle's nest. Bottomless abysses surrounded on all sides. Only one narrow path winding along the edge of the precipice led to its gates, where 2 warriors could hold back an entire army. Supplies of water and provisions inside would last for years of siege. Taking Alamut by storm, it was like trying to move a mountain with bare hands. All conquerors of the past bypassed this place, considering it cursed. But Hassan-i Sabbah saw in this not an obstacle, but an opportunity. Sensation, fortress captured from within, he did not bring battering rams to the walls. He acted more cunningly. His da'as began to work with the population of the valley around Alamut. They healed the sick, helped the poor, and spoke of impending justice. Slowly but surely, they converted the local inhabitants to their faith. Then the garrison's turn came. Preachers infiltrated the barracks disguised as merchants and craftsmen. They found the discontented, those who hated the Seljuk rulers. They promised them a new life, a new faith. One by one, the garrison soldiers secretly pledged allegiance to the unseen old man of the mountain. September 4th, 1090, the day everything changed. On this day, under the cover of night, Hassan-i Sabbah, disguised as a simple teacher, walked into the gates of Alamut. He simply walked in. For several weeks he lived in the fortress, secretly meeting with his followers. And then the moment of truth arrived. The fortress commander, a loyal servant of the Seljuks, realized with horror that he was a prisoner in his own home. His assistants, his guards, his servants, all were already Hassan's men. He was surrounded. Without a single shot, without a single sword strike, the great fortress of Alamut passed into the hands of the old man of the mountain. Shocking deal. Fortress for a receipt. What did Hassan do with the defeated commander? Beheaded him? Thrown him from the cliff? No, he acted like a true Grand Master. He politely asked the commander to leave the fortress and, so he wouldn't leave empty-handed, issued him a receipt for 3,000 gold dinars, which the commander was to cash with one of Hassan's secret followers in a neighboring city. Astonished by this turn of events, the commander left, and most incredibly, the check was indeed paid to him. Hassan didn't just seize the fortress, he bought it. He showed the world that his word was law, and his financial network stretched far beyond the mountains. From that day until his death, for 35 years, Hassan-i Sabbah never again left Alamut. He became a voluntary recluse, a phantom, managing his growing empire from a dark cell. But from this eagle's nest, he would begin his war, a war that would make the entire civilized world tremble with terror. He no longer needed refuge. Now he had a citadel. And from this citadel, he would begin to create his most perfect and most terrifying weapon. Having secured an impregnable base, Hassan-i Sabbah faced the fundamental problem of any revolution. How could a handful of people oppose the colossal military machine of an empire? The Seljuks had tens of thousands of warriors, untold riches, and control over all major cities. Hassan's answer was asymmetrical and ingenious. He decided that his army would not be large, but perfect. He began to create a weapon unparalleled in the world, and this weapon was made of flesh and blood. Thus was born the Order of the Fedayeen, those who sacrifice themselves. This name fully reflected their essence. They were not merely soldiers blindly going into battle. Each of them was a work of art, the result of years of grueling and psychologically sophisticated training, perhaps unrivaled until the 20th century. The process began with recruitment. Hassan's agents searched throughout Persia not just for strong, but for intelligent, capable, and most importantly, vulnerable young people. These could be orphans with no family, or youths from poor families dreaming of glory, or fiery idealists who hated the Seljuk tyranny. They were brought to Alamut, and here their transformation began. Training in Alamut was divided into several levels. Physical training was relentless. They became masters of hand-to-hand combat, dagger-wielding, disguise, and survival in any conditions. But the main emphasis was on intellect. The Fedayeen studied foreign languages, Arabic, Turkic, even Greek. They delved into the culture and customs of the peoples among whom they were to live. They could spend years posing as itinerant merchants, Christian monks, or Sufi dervishes, waiting for their moment. They were taught to be invisible, in plain sight. But the core of the entire system was ideological conditioning. Hassan-i Sabbah developed a complex, 9-tiered system of initiation that gradually, step by step, completely reformatted the adept's consciousness. In the initial stages, the disciple was merely instilled with doubts about the dogmas of official Islam, by pointing out contradictions and injustices in the world. Next, he was introduced to a secret, esoteric interpretation of the Quran, proving that every word held a hidden, batanite meaning, accessible only to the chosen. In the middle stages, the Fedai had already completely renounced his old faith and accepted the divinity of the Imam, the unseen spiritual leader of the Ismailis, whose earthly representative was Hassan-i Sabbah. In the highest stages, the final, most shocking secret was revealed to him, that all religions, all rituals and laws were merely conventions created to manage the ignorant masses. But for the initiated there was neither good nor evil, sin nor righteousness. There was only one goal, to fulfill the Sheikh's will. This system created a new type of human. The Fedai believed that by killing at Hassan's command, he was not committing a sin, but administering ultimate justice. Death in the course of a mission was not a tragedy for him, but the greatest triumph, an instantaneous transition to paradise and eternal bliss. They did not fear death, they craved it. Legend has it that when Hassan wanted to demonstrate his power, he didn't show treasuries or arsenals. He led a guest to the edge of the fortress wall, made a signal, and several of his Fedayeen, standing guard, without a hint of doubt and with a smile on their faces, stepped into the abyss. This demonstration affected ambassadors and sultans more powerfully than any army. They understood that they had encountered a force that did not obey the laws of human nature. Thus, from his mountain citadel, Hassan-i Sabbah forged hundreds of living daggers, perfect assassins, devoid of fear, doubt, and pity, and now he was ready to direct this weapon into the very heart of his enemy. The first and main target was the man who had once sent him into exile, the all-powerful Vizier Nizam al-Mulk. The world held its breath. The era of great terror was beginning. Imagine a state that had no clear borders, collected no taxes, and fielded no vast armies. Its territory was a network of impregnable castle nests scattered across the mountains, and its army were ghosts. This was the state of Hassan-i Sabbah. He understood that in open battle, his handful of followers would be swept away by the Seljuk army in a single day. Therefore, he invented a new form of warfare, a war where victory was brought not by brute force, but by surgical precision and paralyzing terror. 11th century shock content. Public execution as a political statement, unlike common hired assassins who operate in the shadows and try to conceal their tracks. Hassan-i Sabbah's assassins turned assassination into a public spectacle. Their targets were not minor officials, but the most prominent figures of the empire, viziers, the most influential emirs, celebrated generals, the judges and theologians most hated by the Ismailis, and the place for the strike was chosen not in a dark alley, but where the impact would be maximal. A Fedai, who had lived for years under cover, could strike on a Friday during prayer in the capital's main mosque, in front of hundreds of worshippers, or during a lavish palace ceremony, surrounded by the victim's personal guard. The main weapon was a short, specially poisoned dagger, but the most terrifying part began after the strike. Having successfully completed his mission, Fedei, never attempted to escape. He remained at the scene of the crime, often smiling as he met his death at the swords of the enraged guards. This was their message to the world: we do not fear you. We do not fear death. We can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. Main target. The overthrow of a titan, and the first target in this campaign of terror, was the most powerful man in the Seljuk Empire, the man who embodied the entire system that Hassan hated, his former friend and patron, if legend is to be believed, the great Vizier Nizam al-Mulk. This was not just revenge, it was a brilliant strategic move. Nizam al-Mulk was the architect of the empire, its brain and backbone. To kill him meant to decapitate the state. October 14, 1092, the day that went down in history. On this day, the vizier's caravan stopped for a rest near the city of Nahavand. Nizam al-Mulk, after dinner, was sitting in his luxurious palanquin. Suddenly, a man disguised as a Sufi dervish approached him, asking for alms. When he got close enough, a dagger flashed from beneath his ragged cloak. The strike was fatal. The attacker, a Fedei named Bu Tahir Arani, was immediately hacked to pieces by the guards, but it was too late. The brain of the empire, the great Nizam al-Mulk, was dead. Domino effect. Empire in chaos. News of the vizier's murder spread across the country like wildfire, causing shock and panic. How did they manage to get to the most guarded man in the state? Who was next? The Sultan himself. Paranoia gripped the court. Everyone began to suspect everyone else. And just a month later, Sultan Malik Shah I himself died under mysterious circumstances. Historians still debate whether it was the work of the assassins or palace schemers, but the result was the same. The empire plunged into chaos, and a bloody internecine war for the throne among the Sultan's sons. Hassan-i Sabbah achieved his goal. Without an army, he in essence won the war. He did not conquer a single city, but he destroyed order within the enemy's ranks. His doctrine of terror worked flawlessly. Now everyone knew. The old man of the mountain could not be reasoned with. He could not be defeated. He could only be feared. But how did he manage to instill such inhuman devotion in his followers? His enemies were certain. Magic and drugs must have been involved. Thus was born the most famous and chilling legend of the assassins. So, Hassan-i Sabbah's doctrine of terror worked flawlessly. The greatest rulers and commanders slept in chainmail, fearing the shadow in the corner of their own bedroom. But the main question remained, one that drove both enemies and allies insane. How? How did he do it? How could an ordinary man transform hundreds of young men full of life into ruthless instruments who not only didn't fear death but went to it with joy? The human mind refused to believe that this could be achieved by persuasion alone. The answer had to be different, more sinister, and an answer was found. Marco Polo's exclusive testimony. The secret of paradise on earth revealed. A century and a half after Hassan's death, the famous Venetian Marco Polo traveled through these lands. He was a merchant, an adventurer, and most importantly, a brilliant storyteller. It is in his description of the world that we find a chilling story that for centuries defined the image of the assassins. Marco Polo, referencing local accounts, told Europe about the old man of the mountain's most diabolical invention. He wrote that Hassan-i Sabbah ordered a secret garden to be created in a secluded mountain valley. But this was no ordinary garden. It was an exact physical copy of paradise as described in the Quran. At his command, engineers created artificial streams from which flowed not water, but purest wine, sweetest honey, and fresh milk. The most exquisite fruit trees from around the world grew all around. In luxurious pavilions, adorned with gold and silks, unearthly music played, and the air was filled with the scents of rare flowers and incense. And most importantly, in this garden lived the most beautiful maidens, houris, trained in the arts of seduction, singing, and dancing. Mind control technology. A journey to paradise and back. The procedure described by Marco Polo is simple and terrible. A chosen young Fedei was brought to the sheikh. There he was given a special drink, mixed with opium or hashish. When he fell into a deep sleep, he was gently carried into this paradise garden. Upon waking, the youth could not believe his eyes. He had indeed found himself in paradise. Around him were houris who fulfilled all his desires. He spent several days in this state of euphoria, completely losing touch with reality. And then the cycle repeated. He was again put to sleep and carried back to the austere chambers of Alamut fortress. He awoke at the feet of the old man of the mountain. Hassan-i Sabbah looked at him with a wise gaze, and said, "My son, you have seen but a glimpse of the paradise I can bestow upon you. You were there by my will. Execute my command. Kill the enemy of our faith. And if you fall in this sacred struggle, my angels will instantly transport your soul back to this garden, but this time forever." After such an experience, what did death mean to a fedai? It was just a key, a door leading to eternal bliss. This story perfectly explained their fanaticism. They were not just warriors, they were addicts, dependent on the paradisiacal pleasure their master promised them. Revelation of the century. Why the Garden of Paradise is a myth. This version became canonical in the West. The word assassin was firmly linked to the word hashishin, meaning hashish user. But was that truly the case? Modern historians, having studied all available sources, have concluded the story of the Garden of Paradise is most likely a brilliant example of medieval black propaganda. Propaganda created by Hassan's enemies to discredit his movement. Firstly, as we've already mentioned, Marco Polo was not a witness to these events. He recorded rumors 150 years later. Secondly, the word hashishin itself in Arab chronicles of that time was not used literally, but as an insult, a synonym for rabble, scum, godless ones. It was a way to demean Hassan's followers in the eyes of devout Muslims. Thirdly, and most importantly, the actions of the Fedayeen demanded absolute clarity of mind. Imagine a person who needs to live for years in a foreign city, perfectly play a role, wait for the right moment, and deliver a single precise blow in the chaos of a crowd. This is the work of a super agent, not someone under the influence of drugs. So what is the truth? The truth, as is often the case, turned out to be both simpler and more terrifying. Hassan-i Sabbah didn't need hashish and fake theatrics. His primary drug was an idea. He was a genius of psychology. He gave these young people what they never had, a sense of belonging, a higher purpose, belief in their own chosenness, and the promise of eternal glory. He replaced their family, homeland, and even God. Their paradise was not in a garden with houris. Their paradise lay in unquestioning obedience to their sheikh's will. And to achieve this paradise, they were ready for anything. Can you imagine a ruler who, after capturing his citadel, voluntarily locks himself within it for the rest of his days? This is precisely what Hassan-i Sabbah did. After the triumphant and bloodless capture of Alamut in 1090, he never again descended from the eagle's nest. For 35 years he lived as an ascetic, like a cloistered monk, managing his growing empire from a single room that simultaneously served him as a bedroom, study, and library. Behind the scenes of terror, the unknown life of the old man of the mountain contemporaries, even his enemies, described his lifestyle with astonishment. He renounced all luxury. His clothing was made of coarse wool, and his food was the simplest: bread, onions, and goat cheese. He slept on a thin mat on the floor. He dedicated all his time to prayer, the study of sciences, and of course strategic planning. From his cell, like a spider at the center of a web, he controlled dozens of fortresses, thousands of followers, and hundreds of spies across the Middle East. His orders, transmitted through a complex system of messengers, spread to all corners of the world and were obeyed without question. He created a perfect machine of total control. But it would be a mistake to consider him merely a fanatic. Hassan-i Sabbah was a man of encyclopedic knowledge. He transformed Alamut not only into a military base, but also into one of the largest scientific and cultural centers of its time. At his command, agents worldwide bought or stole the rarest manuscripts on mathematics, astronomy, alchemy, medicine, and philosophy. Alamut's library was considered one of the richest in the world, perhaps second only to the libraries of Baghdad and Cairo. He gathered around him the best scholars and engineers who worked on creating new siege engines, water supply systems for mountain fortresses, and, according to rumors, even on the study of poisons and explosives. The law of the dagger, iron order within the order Hassan established in his domains, was ironclad. Any breach of discipline was punishable by death. In Alamut, a strict prohibition on alcohol was enforced. Music, feasts, and any displays of luxury were forbidden. Everyone was to live as ascetics, completely dedicating themselves to the cause. And this law was the same for everyone, including the sheikh himself and his family. And here we encounter one of the most shocking facts of his biography. one confirmed even by chronicles hostile to him. Hassan had 2 sons. One of them was accused of violating the prohibition on alcohol. He drank wine. Without a moment's hesitation, Hassan ordered his own son executed. The other son was accused of complicity in the murder of one of the Da'as, preachers. Although there was no direct evidence, Hassan, to quash any suspicions and show that he had no favorites, ordered the execution of his second heir as well. Think about it. A man who, without a shadow of a doubt, sacrifices his own children in the name of the order he established. This icy, inhuman resolve is perhaps more frightening than any legends about hashish. It shows that for him, the idea was above any human feelings, above love, above family ties, above life itself, intellectual terror. A battle of minds beyond the physical elimination of enemies. Hassan-i Sabbah also waged a war of ideas. He and his followers wrote dozens of theological treatises in which they brilliantly demolished the doctrines of Sunni theologians. They organized public debates where their logic and eloquence stumped the most learned men of the empire. Their goal was not just to frighten, but to prove the intellectual superiority of Ismailism. They wanted to destroy not only the bodies of their enemies, but also the foundations of their faith. So, for 35 years, from his solitary mountain cell, this enigmatic man kept half the world on edge. He created a unique state order based on a blend of espionage, fanatical faith, and scientific progress. His empire seemed eternal. But in the east, clouds were gathering. From the boundless steppes, a force was moving, one that neither empires nor religions could withstand. A force that did not believe in gods and did not fear assassins. The Mongols were marching west, and their path led directly to the gates of Alamut. By the mid-13th century, the world had changed. Hassan-i Sabbah had long been dead, but his work lived on. His successors, new old men of the mountain, continued to rule from Alamut. The order of assassins still inspired terror. Their daggers still found their targets. They had outlived the Seljuk Empire, which fragmented, largely due to their efforts. They forged alliances with some rulers, waged war with others. It seemed their mountain empire, protected by rocks and fear, would last forever. But they failed to account for one thing. From the distant east a wave was coming that swept away everything in its path. Kingdoms, peoples, and religions. It was the Mongol horde, the new enemy. A force that does not fear death. The Mongols were the complete opposite of all the assassins' previous enemies. They could not be intimidated. They themselves were terror incarnate. They could not be decapitated by killing a leader. If one Khan was killed, another, even more brutal, immediately rose to take his place. They could not be disintegrated from within. Their iron discipline, Genghis Khan's Yasa, was absolute. Moreover, the assassins made a fatal mistake. They tried to employ their favorite tactic against the Mongols. They sent a detachment of 40 Fedayeen to assassinate the great Khan Monkey. The plot was uncovered. The Mongols' response was swift and merciless. Monkey Khan gave orders to his brother, Hulagu Khan, go west, destroy the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, and wipe the assassin's nest from the face of the earth. Leave no one alive, not even infants in cradles, so that their very name is forgotten. The siege of the century. Fire against stone in 1256. Hulagu's colossal, 100,000-strong army approached the foot of Alamut. It was a clash of two philosophies of war. The unbreakable defense of the assassins against the unstoppable siege power of the Mongols. The last ruler of Alamut, the young and inexperienced Rukn al-Din Kersha, barricaded himself in the fortress, hoping, like his ancestors, to weather the siege. He believed in the impregnability of his walls. But Hulagu was no Seljuk sultan. He brought with him not just warriors, but the best Chinese engineers, masters of siegecraft. They didn't try to scale the sheer cliffs under a hail of arrows. They began to do what the world had not yet seen on such a scale. Gigantic trebuchets and ballistas were built around Alamut. Day and night, without pause, a storm of fire rained down on the fortress. Massive boulders and pots of burning oil crushed walls and towers that had stood for centuries. Hulagu ultimatum: surrender or total annihilation. For several months, the fortress held out. But even the eagle's nest had a breaking point. The walls cracked, supplies dwindled. The defender's spirit was broken. Hulagu Khan, unwilling to lose his men in a final assault, sent Kersha an ultimatum: surrender, and I will spare your life. Resist, and I will level your fortress to dust and cast its stones to the wind. The young assassin ruler wavered. He hoped for the conqueror's mercy. On December 20, 1256, Rukn al-Din Kursha descended from Alamut and surrendered to Hulagu's mercy. This was the end of the great empire of shadows, burnt books, the destruction of memory. Hulagu kept part of his word. He did indeed spare Kursha and sent him to the great Khan, but the Mongols' mercy was cruel along the way. Kursha and his entire retinue were treacherously murdered, and then the most terrible part began. The Mongols stormed Alamut. They didn't just plunder it. They methodically destroyed everything connected with the assassins. But their main target was not the treasury, but the library, the legendary treasury of knowledge that Hassan-i Sabbah had amassed for decades. Only one court historian, Juwayni, was allowed by Hulagu to take a few harmless manuscripts, including the Quran. Everything else, thousands of priceless works on philosophy, science, medicine, and most importantly, all the archives and secret teachings of the order itself, were thrown into a gigantic bonfire. The Mongols understood. To destroy an enemy, one must destroy not only their body, but also their memory. In the flames of that blaze, the true history of Hassan-i Sabbah burned away. All that reached us are fragments, legends, and accounts from his enemies. He transformed from a real person into a myth, a shadow, whose true motives and goals remained forever buried beneath the ashes of Alamut. But can an idea be burned? Can fear be killed? The old man of the mountain's legacy proved far more resilient than the stone walls of his fortress. So, the bonfire lit by the Mongols in Alamut died down. The assassin fortresses were destroyed, their followers slaughtered. It seemed the history of the most terrifying secret order in history had reached its inglorious end. The world breathed a sigh of relief. But was it truly the end? Or did the phantom of the old man of the mountain, having shed its physical body, only acquire a new, even more dangerous form, the form of an immortal idea? Let's set aside myths and legends for a moment. Who was Hassan-i Sabbah, really? If you look at him through the eyes of his enemies, the Seljuks, the Crusaders, the Baghdad caliphs, he was absolute evil, the devil incarnate, a heretic who perverted faith, created a sect of ruthless assassins, and plunged prosperous states into an abyss of chaos and paranoia. He was the first international terrorist in history, whose network terrorized half the world. From this perspective, his destruction by the Mongols was a blessing, the world's deliverance from a plague. But what if you look at him from another side, from the perspective of the persecuted Shiite minority? For them, he was not a terrorist, but a hero of resistance. He was their avenger, a man who single-handedly dared to challenge the giant, repressive machine of the Seljuk Empire. He gave them hope, faith, and more importantly, a weapon. The weapon of the weak against the strong. He proved that even the most powerful tyrant, protected by thousands of soldiers, was vulnerable. That one man with a dagger and unyielding faith could be more terrifying than an entire army. But Hassan-i Sabbah's most striking legacy lies not even in the realm of politics or religion. He was a genius, centuries ahead of his time. He created the world's first professional intelligence and counterintelligence service, based on an agent network and long-term infiltration. He perfectly mastered the art of psychological warfare, understanding that fear and uncertainty could demoralize an enemy more effectively than any weapon. He developed the doctrine of surgical strikes and asymmetric warfare, which is studied today by all special services worldwide. SAS units, the Navy SEALs, the Israeli Mossad, all of them, to one degree or another, are heirs to the old man of the mountain's tactics. Even the word assassin itself entered almost all European languages, becoming synonymous with a professional, cold-blooded killer. The shadow of Hassan-i Sabbah proved incredibly persistent. His image inspired secret societies, revolutionaries, writers, and, of course, video game creators. So, who was he? A hero or a villain? A prophet or a manipulator? A saint or a devil? Perhaps the truth is that he was all of these simultaneously. He was a product of his brutal time, an era when faith was a weapon and life was cheap. He was a mirror reflecting all the darkest and brightest aspects of human nature. The thirst for justice and boundless cruelty, the pursuit of knowledge and fanatical faith, the genius of a strategist, and the icy heart of a tyrant. The history of Alamut was burned. Hassan-i Sabbah's true motives will forever remain a mystery to us. But his main lesson, his chilling legacy, lives on to this day. He proved that the most impregnable fortress is the human mind, and whoever finds its key can rule the world, even from the shadows, even 1,000 years later.